We're now going to examine some of the actual historical events in which Shroshim did come down, and since we know the principles that determine how the Rebbe will act in order to conceal from the Sitra Achra, we now can understand why these conditions happened, why the events of their birth and growth actually happened the way they did. And the first area, or the first event that we will examine, is the idea or the event of Lot, who of course was the nephew of Avram, and Bnei Esav and his daughters. Now, if you recall the story, that after Sodom, they were of course rescued from Sodom by the Malachim, and what happened is they fled Sodom, and they ran into the mountains, and they ran into a cave. Okay? Now, they thought, or rather the daughters thought, that they were the only ones left. They thought that mankind was completely destroyed, because the daughter said that there is no man among men living, okay, that we can have children with. Therefore, the daughters thought that there was no man alive. They thought that the destruction of Sodom was really the destruction of the world. Therefore, they felt that they wanted to have children, and the only one available, of course, was their father, Lot. So therefore, they came up with this ploy that what they would do is get Lot drunk, and then the oldest would first engage the father in relationship, and as a result of that, the Torah tells us from that union came Moav, the nation of Moav, and the oldest daughter named the child Moav, which means Me'ov, from my father, which doesn't show too much modesty. In any case, the second daughter, the youngest daughter, she took the second night, and the union from that particular relationship was Ammon. She named the son Bnei Ami, child of my people, which of course refers to my people means her father. So she was more modest. And Ammon, who was of course the founder of the nation of Ammon and Moav, Ammon came from the second daughter. Now, what happened is that the neshama of David HaMelech descended at that point, while this kind of relationship was going on between daughter and father, and it went into Moav, the individual called Moav. That's where David HaMelech's neshama first made entrance into this world. Now, in other words, David HaMelech, who is the shirish, the root of Mashiach ben David, and after Yehuda lost the eighth or the stock, the main area of the Mashiachas, because it says, as I had mentioned previously, Vayered Yehuda me'is Esav, he lost it because he sold Yosef. Therefore, David HaMelech got it. Therefore, what happens is that the shirish of the Mashiach ben David and the Yesod of the Mashiach ben David, the main foundation that makes, now went into Moav. And we see, interestingly enough, that this neshama comes down through incest, that here is a daughter having relationships with her father, so there we have incest. Again, so therefore here's the tumah that we see, which is Sitra Achra is obviously not going to see what's going on. In addition, that the one who brings down the neshama of David HaMelech is not Avram Avinu, but Lot and his daughters. You think that the yichus of David HaMelech would be not from Lot and his daughters, but from Avram. Instead, we find that David HaMelech is descending through an incestuous relationship, okay? And the second thing he's descending, of course, is not from yichus, from Avram, he's descending from Lot. Now, as a result of this, as I had said, the neshama of David, or his shirish, went into the oldest daughter's son, Moav. Then eventually it went through Moav for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it finally descended into Ruth. Ruth finally, as a result of the fact that she remained righteous, she picked up that wandering shirish of David HaMelech that was already down, and it finally went into Ruth. And when Ruth married Boaz, it went into Klal Yisrael. That's how that shirish had to wander to get into Klal Yisrael. That shirish and mamish the yesod of the Mashiach ben David. Now, that's in terms of Moav, which is the oldest daughter's son. Now, in terms of the youngest daughter's son, which is Ammon, we find, interestingly, that Ruth married Boaz, and from them came David HaMelech. Ammon, his descendant was Naamor, who married Shlomo HaMelech, and they gave birth to Rechavam, which of course is the lineage of the Mashiach ben David himself. Therefore, Rechavam's neshama, he descended again through incest with the second daughter, and again through Lot and not Avram. He descended, of course, into the youngest daughter's son, Ammon. Then finally, this Shirish neshama finally entered into Naamor, and from Naamor, who was an Ammoni, of course, that neshama went into Klal Yisrael because she married Shlomo, and therefore they gave birth to Rechavam. So we see that David HaMelech, who is the eighth, the Shirish and the Yesud of the Mashiach ben David, and Rechavam, who is also a Shirish of Mashiach ben David, and not only that, which we will see later, that Rechavam was supposed to be the true Mashiach ben David, as we will see later, because Yerovam was supposed to be Mashiach ben Yosef, and Rechavam was supposed to be Mashiach ben David. However, that attempt failed, as we will see later on when I talk about Rechavam and Yerovam. But in any case, we see that the neshama, the shirish of the Mashiach of ben David, of David HaMelech, who was a shirish and the actual Yesod of the Mashiach ben David, and also Rechavam, who was supposed to be the Mashiach ben David, that they came down through Tumah, through apparent chet, which is incestuous relationships between Lot and his daughters, and also they came down through no yichus, through Lot instead of Avram. So here's a classic example of how the Rabbi Shalom brought down the shirish of the Mashiach ben David into the universe, the world, into the world, physical world, and he concealed it from the Sitra Achra by having an incestuous relationship give birth to these particular shroshim of both the first daughter and the second daughter. And therefore David HaMelech, of course, was brought down, and also Rechavam, because Ruth is the forerunner, is the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, when she married, of course, Boaz. And Naamor, the Ammonis, she was the mother of Rechavam. And these were the two descendants that emerged from these particular relationships. So here we see in history exactly how the theoretical foundation or framework which I had previously presented actually manifests itself in history. Now, interesting enough, you find this, where do we find this in Chazal? I'm merely telling you the answers, or the actual pshat, the remez. Where do we find this in Chazal? The Medrash says, it says the pasuk, after Avram came up from Egypt and Lot was with him, it says, V'gam Lot, and also to Lot, HaHoiliches Avram, that went with Avram, Hoyot Tzoin, he had flock, Boko, he had, of course, oxen and so on, V'oiholim, and he had tents. And the Medrash says that Oiholim, and he had tents, means he had two tents, because Oiholim is plural. That is Maramas, the two tents, which means to the two houses or two descendants of Lot, through, of course, his daughters. One is Ruth HaMoaviyah, one is Ruth from Moav, and the second is Naamor HaAmmonis, Naamor, who descends, of course, from Ammon. So you see, the Medrash says that Oiholim by Lot alludes to the fact that from him will descend those two individuals, Ruth and Naamor, and from them, of course, will begin the Davidic line. In addition, it says in the Medrash, it says in the Pasuk in Chumash, Kum, when the Malachim tell Lot, when they tell him to flee Sodom, they say, Kum, arise, Kach is ishtecha, take your wife, Ve'ashtei b'noisecha, and your two daughters, Hanimtsois, that are found here, and of course flee Sodom, because you will be included in the destruction of Sodom if you don't. Now the Medrash observes that it does make sense. It should say, arise, take your wife and your two daughters, and of course flee. Why does it say, take your wife and your two daughters which are found here? Obviously they're found here. So that is an extra word. So the Medrash darshans or expounds that it means this: Kum, take, kach es ishtecho, your wife, ve'ashtei b'noisecha, and your two daughters, that hanimtsois, that have or will emanate from them two things which are found. When you find something, it's a precious thing, it's a valuable thing. In other words, there are two metzios, two found objects which the daughters will give rise to. One is Ruth, which of course will be. One is of course Ruth, which bears the neshama of David HaMelech, which originally started from the son of the older daughter Moav. And the second nimtzo, found item, of course, is Naamah, who of course will bear Rechavam and Rechavam, and of course which originated from Ammon, who was the son of the second daughter. Now, it is interesting to note that the Torah uses the lashon hanimtzois, that is found. Okay, when it says take your wife and your two daughters away from Sodom, and hanimtzois, and those things which are found with them, that's the drasha, that's the particular lesson which is being learned. It uses the lashon of metzio, found. Now, it's very easy to understand that the metzio, when you walk and you find something, that this object is totally unexpected to be here. That's what a metzio is. Something which is found is an object which is valuable, but it's totally unexpected. You automatically, by accident or unwittingly chance upon an object. That's when it's called a metzio. If you know it's there, it's not called a metzio. It's not called that something you found. So therefore, this is, of course, tells us that the neshama of David HaMelech in Ruth, and originally in Moav, the son of the oldest daughter, and the neshama of Rechavam, which was a Naamah, which of course comes from Ammon, which is the son of the second daughter, was totally unexpected to the Sitra Achra. That's why it's called the Mitzois. That it's a Mitzia, it's found here, and he himself, the Sitra Achra, was not aware that it's found here. He was not aware that it entered the Bria through Moav and Ammon, and he was not aware that it went through Ammon and Moav for hundreds of years until it finally rested in the individuals of Ruth and Naamah. That's why it's used in the Mitzois. They are found here automatically and unwittingly. And therefore it was unexpected to the Sitra Achra. And while I'm mentioning the idea of found, it says, the Medrash continues and says that it says, Motzosi David Avdi, I have found my servant David. So the Medrash says, where did I find him? And the answer is in Sodom. God found David HaMelech in Sodom. Now we know what that means. That he found him in Sodom, meaning Lot and his daughters were in Sodom. That's where the Rabbi Shalom found them. But why all of a sudden did he find them that they were unexpected? Not that they were unexpected to the Rabbi Shalom, but they were unexpected to the Sitra Achra because they were concealed from the Sitra Achra. In other words, the Sitra Achra did not expect that Lot and his daughters who are fleeing an evil place like Sodom, where they actually lived. So obviously you can't say too much good things about Lot if he's living in a place as evil as Sodom. That Lot and his daughter have no yichus. It's not Avram Avinu. There's no yichus mitzad themselves. And also that these individuals, or rather what is going on in that cave, is chatoim, sins, incestuous relationships. Therefore, the language that Tehillim uses is Matzosi David Avdi. I have found David my servant, because David HaMelech's entrance into the world is unexpected to the Sitra Achra. And therefore, I can tell you another idea, that it says in davening, okay, Umatzosa es levovoy nemon lefonecho, by Avram Avinu, it says by Vorach David, okay, Umatzosa es levovoy and you have found his heart faithful to you. And again it uses the lashon motzo, that God found by accident the heart of Avram Avinu faithful to him. What do you mean found? It's not unexpected to the Rebbeinu Shalom. It was unexpected to the Sitra Achra that Avram Avinu would be righteous. Why? Because if you recall, I had said that Avram Avinu was a Shirish L'Mashiach ben David. Therefore, who was the father of Avram Avinu? Terach. You would not expect that Terach, who is one of the strong idol worshippers, would actually produce an offspring like Avram Avinu. So that's another way the Rabbi Shalom slipped down the shirish of the Mashiach ben David into the offspring of Terach. and that the Sitra Achra was not aware, because he doesn't look for that kind of relationships that Terach, who is an idol worshipper, is involved in Chatoim, and it also says that Terach used to have relationships with his wife when she was a Nidor. Okay, so therefore one would not expect that the Shirish of the Mashiach ben David, who is Avram Avinu, would come down to Terach and his wife, who are involved in basically wrong relationships while she's a Nidor, okay, while she's seeing blood, and also that there's no Yichus. The man is an idol worshipper. Therefore, we find the same notion of umatzoso as levovei nemun lefanecho, that God unexpectedly found. Of course, He knew it was there all the time, but He unexpectedly found because it was surprising to the Sitra Achra that you had Avraham Avinu coming out, and of course, the surprising to the Sitra Achra that there was the Shoirish of the Mashiach ben David. And it also says in Tehillim, Lam natseach al tashches, do not destroy. Le David Michtam, written by David a Michtam, Bevocher mipnei Shaul b'Ma'ora, when David HaMelech ran away from Shaul and he ran to a cave, he wrote a Tehillah, and it's one of Tehillim. And it says there, the Medrash says that he prayed to God and he said that you showed mercy to others, to Lot and his daughters in a cave. In other words, you saved them from Sodom. Why did the Rebbeinu Shem save Lot from Sodom and his daughters? For my sake. David HaMelech says, for my sake, so that my neshama should enter the Bria in that guise. So therefore he says, so he's praying, David HaMelech, Al tashches, therefore don't destroy me. You save them for my sake, so surely you can save me also. In other words, you save them in the cave for my sake, so surely you can save me, who has to run into a cave also, and not destroy me. So therefore, we now understand that this is one of the classic events, how the neshama of David HaMelech and Rechavam, how they descended to the world in terms of, in the midst of illicit relationships, incestuous relationships, in the midst of no yichus at all. And as I mentioned, we find the same idea with Avram when he was born, of course, to Terach. Now, and the last, or I just want to mention other ideas, that one daughter, the older daughter, said to the young daughter, Unechaye me'ovinu zora, and let us make sure that we can preserve from our father seed. So the Medrash says that one daughter didn't say that we should have children from our father, but that we should preserve seed from our father, because prophetically they were saying that what we want to preserve is not children, but we want to bring down the seed of David, the shirish of the union of the Mashiach ben David. That's what we want to bring down, because he will have other parents down the line. In other words, to them it was merely seed, an offspring that they wouldn't be the parents of Lot and his oldest daughter and Lot and his youngest daughter. So they wanted to bring down zera, or seed, that this individual or shirish would have parents later on. And this the Medrash, of course, expounds on. And interestingly enough, the Medrash says, it says that they intoxicated their father in order to have a relationship with him. So the Medrash says, where did he get the wine? Where did they get wine that they were able to intoxicate Lot? So the Medrash says that the Rebbeinu Shalom made it that a well of wine came out from the mountain. In other words, the Rebbeinu Shalom himself provided them with the wine that they can intoxicate their father. So we see that he enabled the event to occur in order for the shroshim to come down, which shows, of course, that the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to bring, of course, the shroshim down by this guise in order to conceal it from the Sitra Achra. And it also says in Yoel, it says that in the Messianic times, and it will be in that day, that springs or fountains of wine will flow from the mountains. And that of course is alluding, because by the Rebbeinu Shalom enabling them to get wine from a fountain, he is indicating in his own cryptic way that what they are now about to do is usher in the Messianic, the ability of the Messianic times to arrive, and therefore it's alluded by an event which will truly occur in the Messianic times, namely that there will be a well of wine that flows from the mountains, and which is interesting that this is what's merumas and the miracle which occurred for the daughters of Lot. The next event, or the next incident, where we see that the Ribono Shel Olam conceals from the Sitra Achra that which he's about to do. In other words, the next incident, which involves a shirish of the Mashiach ben David descending, and therefore it needs this concealment from the Sitra Achra, is the incident of Yehuda and Tamar. Now, we know that the reason why the Ribono Shel Olam hides from the Sitra Achra the fact that he's about to allow a shirish of the Mashiach ben David to descend is in order that the Sitra Achra should not mekatreg, no, it should not prosecute. Because, as I mentioned previously, the Sitra Achra, of course, always tries to prosecute, especially when he feels that a great neshama is about to come down, and therefore this can cause tremendous hashpor, tremendous influence or enlightenment to the Jewish people. So therefore, of course, he prosecutes and says that Klal Yisrael does not deserve this. Now, by Yehuda and Tamar, we can ask, what was the kitrug? In other words, do we know, is there any way that Torah is maramas to us? In what way the Sitra Achra, or the Sultan, in his position as a mekatrig, as a prosecutor, what could he have used as his ammunition in not allowing some kind of a shirish of Mashiach ben David to descend in the incident of Yehuda and Tamar? And the truth is that the Torah itself is megala, that there was a kitrug. And it starts off the parsha right after the sale of Yosef to the Yishmaelim, and that were going to Egypt. In other words, right after the brothers sold Yosef, who was of course now going to descend to Egypt, it now starts the parsha of Yehuda and Tamar. And it says there, the first pasuk, Vayired Yehuda me'is Echov, and Yehuda descended, or he went down from his brothers. Now, in that pasuk itself, we see what the kitrug against Yehuda was. Rashi says that when it says that Judah went down from his brothers, it means that his brothers degraded him from his high position that he formerly held. Why? Because he indicated, or he presented a lack of leadership. This is what they told him. So therefore they degraded him from his leadership role. They told him, when they came back and they saw how sad, how incredibly pained their father was, Yaakov, they said to him that had you told us not to sell Yosef, we would have listened to you. So therefore they actually had a claim against Yehuda, why he didn't exercise his leadership, and had he said not to sell Yosef, they would have listened to him. So therefore we see, so therefore his brothers degraded him from that leadership role, because he should have exercised the leadership role, and they would have listened to him had he said not to sell Yosef. This is what they said to him after they saw the tsa'ar, the pain of Yaakov. Now, as a result of this, Yehuda, there was a tremendous kitrug, because what was happening? Yosef was, as I had mentioned previously, was the Esav of the Mashiach ben Yosef. In other words, he was not just a shirish of the Mashiach ben Yosef. And a shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef means an individual who can receive the kingship or the yechidah of the Mashiachos. He can become a Mashiach if the time is ready. But he was the Esav of the Mashiach ben Yosef, which means that he himself would emanate other shroshim. In other words, Yosef was the trunk of the tree, the main stock, from which other neshamas would emanate into other bodies and be born, and the other people would be shirish of Mashiach ben Yosef. He who would give rise to the other souls would himself be the Esav, the foundation, the main trunk itself. And that's what Yosef was. Now, when Yehuda allowed Yosef to be sold and actually contributed to the selling of Yosef, what does that mean? It means that he deposed Yosef from his position. He actually removed Yosef from his status as a Esav of the Mashiach ben Yosef. Why? Because slavery in Egypt, of course, is basically a living death. Actually, if you think about it, perhaps it would have been better for the brothers to have killed Yosef than to have sold him to slavery. Because a slave in Egypt was the lowest social rung. It was a terrible living conditions, and it was anyway only a short amount of time that a person died as a slave. And there was absolutely no hope. It was terrible anguish to be a slave in any of the ancient countries. And therefore, by selling Yosef, what they were really condemning him, of course, is to a living death, and ultimately a death in itself. And it actually is a more horrible way of dying, by becoming a slave and then dying. Now, in any case, as a result of that, since they all knew that by selling him to Egypt, basically it was all finished for Yosef, therefore what Yehuda did is he removed Yosef from the status or the position as the Mashiach ben Yosef in terms of his being a Yesod. Therefore, the kitrig against Yehuda was, and there was certainly a kitrig, is that he himself does not deserve to be a Yesod of the Mashiach ben David, and that's exactly what Yehuda was until that point. Yehuda was the foundation of the Mashiach ben David, and from Yehuda would emanate Shloshim. Therefore, the kitrig against Yehuda is that he should not be the Yesod of the Mashiach ben David. This was a tremendous kitrig that, of course, was against Yehuda at that time. Now, also a kitrig was, besides the fact that he shouldn't be a shirish, or rather a Yesod of the Mashiach ben David, he certainly shouldn't bring down other Shloshim. He doesn't deserve it. Since he deposed Yosef from his status as a Yesod of Mashiach ben Yosef, he therefore deserves to lose his status as a Yesod, and he certainly does not deserve to bring down other Shloshim. Therefore, he, as a result of that, he lost the Yesod of Mashiach ben David. That is why we do not say Mashiach ben Yehuda, because Mashiach ben Yehuda would mean that he's Mashiach, a descendant of Yehuda, who was the Yesod, the principal, and this individual who was a Mashiach and merely a root from the original Yesod, meaning Yehuda, is therefore only a descendant. He's a ben Yehuda. And even though he's just a shirish that has the Yechida, and therefore he's the Mashiach, but his shirish itself comes from Yehuda, who is the Yesod. We do not say Mashiach ben Yehuda, because they took away the Yesod, or the foundation of the Mashiach ben David, and they gave it to David HaMelech. That's why we say Mashiach ben David, because David HaMelech became the Yesod of the Mashiach ben David. And that's why he's called, of course, all Mashiachim are called Mashiach ben David. And that is indicated, of course, in the pasuk of Vayirid Yehuda me'is Esav, that Yehuda went down from upon his brothers. Vayirid Yehuda means he descended, means he lost the Mashiachos, or Oved HaMalchus, that royalty was lost to him. He was no more the Yesod of the Mashiach ben David. It was given to David HaMelech, and therefore, of course, he's no more referred to, of course, or any Mashiachim are no more referred to as a shirish of the Mashiach ben Yehuda. And the Mashiach himself, of course, is not the Mashiach ben Yehuda, but is, of course, the Mashiach ben David. This is what happened to Yehuda as a result of the kitrig against him. Now, as I mentioned, therefore, not only was there a kitrig against Yehuda not to be a Yesod because he deposed Yosef from him being a Yesod, but also there was a kitrig that Yehuda certainly shouldn't bring down any more Shloshim. Therefore, obviously, if the Rabbi Shalom wants to allow a new shirish to descend, a new shirish of the Inyan of Ben David, then obviously what must be is that this shirish has to descend in great hester, in great concealment, because of the kitrig against Yehuda. So in other words, we see that the Torah itself indicates why any new shirish that Yehuda would bring in would come through tremendous hester. In other words, the line that David HaMelech would come from, and ultimately the Mashiach ben David would have to be brought down behester, because there's a tremendous kitrig against Yehuda, as indicated from Vayirid Yehuda. And in truth, he did lose the Yesod of the Mashiach ben David. But the kitrig was also that he shouldn't have any shloshim coming from him. Therefore, the Rabbi Shalom, if he wants to bring down a new shirish, would have to hide from the Sitra Achra, and therefore conceal it. And of course, this would have to be concealed in great hester. Now, as the story goes on, so therefore this is the initial introduction that the Torah gives to what's about to transpire. That since Vayirid Yehuda, Yehuda descended from his Mashiachos, from his being a Yesod, therefore his children that he would give birth to, from which David HaMelech and ultimately the Mashiach ben David would descend, would have to be done from Hester. That pasuk is an introduction in terms of the future events which are now about to transpire in the life of Yehuda. Now, Yehuda married, and he had two sons. One was Er, and then Oinayin. And the third son he had Shelah. Okay, three sons. And he took Tamar and he married her off to his son Er. Now, it says in the pasuk that Tamar married Er, of course, and Er died. Now, after Er died, Yehuda took Tamar and he married her off to Einon. Why? Because there is a great soy or Kabbalistic mystery in what's called yibum or levirate marriage, and that when the husband of a woman dies childless, then it is an obligation of a close kin or relative to marry this woman, and this is called levirate marriage, or it's called yibum. And in the days before Matan Torah, any close relative could perform this type of kiddushin, this type of marriage. And what would happen is that Kabbalistically, the neshama of the deceased brother, or the deceased husband I should say, would then descend into the child, and in some way the deceased husband's memory would have a preservation. There would be a remembrance to the deceased husband. Now, before Matan Torah, any close relative could do, including the father-in-law himself. And then they were called goyel. The one who would perform this yibum, miyabeim, the yavama, the sister-in-law, would be called a goyel, a redeemer. Okay, because he would perpetuate or preserve the name of the deceased husband. After the Torah was given, of course, this same ceremony became only true in the brother of the husband who died childless. Therefore, of course, yibum can only be done by the brother or the brother of the deceased individual. This is after Matan Torah. But as I said, before Matan Torah, of course, this could be done by anybody, including the father-in-law or any close kin. And Kabbalistically, of course, as mentioned, there is a great seed or idea or secret in the entire mitzvah or concept of yibum, levirate marriage. Now, therefore, what Yehuda, knowing, of course, these inyanim of yibum, even before the Torah was given, wanted Einon, or rather Tamar, to marry Einon in order to carry on the memory of Er, and she married him. But the Rebbeinu Shalom killed him also before they themselves had any children, and therefore Tamar said, "Give me Shelah." But Yehuda was afraid already because she had succeeded in killing two of his sons, and therefore he figured that there was something wrong with her. So he put her off with a pretext. So he said, "Well, wait until he's grown up, and then I'll give you Shelah." And of course, then he told her, "Go back to your father's house." And of course, she went back and she saw, as Shelah grew up, that Yehuda was obviously not going to give her Shelah. So she therefore decided that she's going to do something in order to bring about the fact that she can carry on or perpetuate, to preserve the name of her dead husband, who now had to be Er and Einon, not just Er. And so her first motive was, of course, a great chesed that she wanted to do, that she wanted her husband to have, or husbands to have a memory, to have some kind of perpetuation of their name. The second motive that she had was that she wanted also to be, to have Judah's descendants coming from her also. She wanted to be part of Klal Yisrael. So because of these two lofty motives, the Rebbeinu Shalom therefore made her plan succeed in several ways. What was her plan? She decided that she would go to the crossroads and she would dress and she would present herself as a prostitute. And she waited until Yehuda passed by because she knew he was going to a certain place, and she made a proposal to Yehuda. Now, the Torah says, interesting enough, that in the Medrash, Rabbi Yochanan says a very interesting idea. But actually, before I just say this, let me just mention that Yehuda then had relationships with her, and she conceived right away from that union, and from that union came parrots. This is what happened ultimately. In other words, she played as a prostitute, and of course he acceded, and from that union came parrots, and from parrots of course comes the Dover HaMelech, and from Dover HaMelech of course ultimately comes the Mashiach ben David. Now, the Medrash says, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan says that Yehuda, when he passed the crossroads, he wanted to go on. I mean, Yehuda was an incredible tzaddik, even though what he did to Yosef, but he was obviously he was one of the shvatim, so he was obviously a tremendous tzaddik, and of course he was going to pass her by. There was no question. But what the Rebbeinu Shalom did is he sent the malach who was in charge of taiva or lust, because the drives of the body are actually given by different malachim who control different aspects of the guf. In any case, what the Rebbeinu Shalom did is he sent this malach, and this malach appeared before Yehuda, and he said to him, it doesn't mean he said to him, or rather he exclaimed concerning Yehuda. It's figurative. And he said to him that, how can you go by? In other words, he said to him that, where will malachim arise? Where will great men arise if you go by? This is what the malach said. And as a result of that, he increased the taiva of Yehuda to such an extent that Yehuda had no bechira. And the Medrash says that he had no bechira, he had no free will, and as a result of the fact that his drive was tremendously increased, he had no free will, and therefore he had, of course, relations with Tamar, who he thought was a zoina, who he thought was a prostitute. Now, as a result of this, of course she conceived, and then she gave birth, of course, to parrots. Now, what do we see from this Medrash? Now, when the Malach said to him, before he increased his taiva, tells us really the entire mechanism of how the Rebbeinu Shalom enables the Mashiach to descend. And that's what really the Malach was saying. He said that, how can you go by? From where will kings arise? In other words, where will the kings who are the Mashiach arise? Where will Gedolim arise? In other words, where will great Neshamas arise? Only through the method of Tuma or Zima. Because this is the way that the Rebbeinu Shalom uses to hide from the Sitra Achra what he is doing. So obviously, what the Malach was saying to him before he actually took away the Bechir of Yehuda, is he was providing the rationale of why he was doing this. And he said to him that since there's great kitrug against you, Yehuda, and there's great kitrugim against Klal Yisrael always, how will the Rebbeinu Shalom be able to bring down the Mashiach or great Neshamas if there's always kitrugim? The only way to do it is through Tumah, through this method. So therefore I am forcing you to live with Tumah, and you can't just go away. So therefore, obviously, he took away Bechira from him. And of course, the Malach indicated, as I said, what the rationale of what the Malach was about to do in the first place. And we see from here that the way the Rebbeinu Shalom brings the Mashiach, or great Neshamas, especially Mashiach, is through Hester, which is brought about in the main through some kind of apparent chet, some kind of apparent impurity or illicit relations or whatever. But anything that looks like a chet, this is the method that the Rebbeinu Shalom uses. Now, in other words, only through the Hester of Tumah, basically, can you avoid Kitrugim, or the prosecution attempts of the Sitra Achra not to bring down the Inyonim of the Mashiach. And this is the method, of course, as I said, that the Rosham uses to bring the Mashiach and great Neshamas, especially, as I mentioned, Mashiach. Now, therefore, of course, he had relations with her, and from them came parrots. Now, she said to him, okay, what will you give me as payment? So he said, I'll give you a gedi, a kid from the goats of my flock, as payment. So she said, well, what will you give me as pledge meantime until you go back and get this particular goat? So she said to him, give me your signet, your royal signet, your signet ring, your cloak, that's the way Targum says it, and your staff. Now Chazal say in the Medrash that when she said this, she was speaking prophetically. She was misnabe, she spoke with Ruach HaKodesh, even though she was not aware. What she said was, give me your signet, means give me your signet from which will arise royalty, which is the royal signet, the ring of kings that they use of course as a signet ring. That's what it indicated. The cloak, give me a cloak, alludes to the Sanhedrin, and give me a staff, that's a staff of the Mashiach. So she herself, through Nevuah, was saying what would come from her and Yehuda, even though she didn't realize this. Now, of course, we learned in the Chumash that Yehuda, he went away and he sent her a kid, but apparently she had disappeared. Now, 3 months went by, and of course, and it was told to Tamar, or rather was told to Yehuda, that Tamar had sinned because after 3 months they saw that she was pregnant. So they told her that Tamar had sinned. So now Tamar, there are Chazal that say that Tamar was the daughter of Shem. Shem, who Chazal say, of course, was Malki Tzedek Kohen Gadol. He was a priest. So therefore, in those days, it was the din, even though before Matan Torah, that if the daughter of a priest would have illicit relationships, she would be chayav sreifa, to burn her. Therefore, Yehuda said, burn her, because she was the daughter of a priest, without realizing, of course, that he was really the father of that child. Now, so she said, she of course did not, she said that she pulled out this signet and this cloak and this staff, and she said that whoever owns this signet, cloak, and staff, this is the one who is the father of this child. And of course the Chumash says, Vayake Yehuda, and Yehuda recognized, of course, these three articles which were his, and he says, Vayomer, and he said, Tzot komimeni, she is right, she's right. Mimeni, Rashi learns, this child is from me. Okay, so therefore, obviously, it shows you the greatness of Yehuda, that Yehuda would rather go into a scandal, and this is obviously what happened, a tremendous scandal, that he actually had relations with a Zoina, even though, interestingly enough, it was okay for him to have relations with Tamar, because he was in line, he was an individual who could fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum before Matan Torah. So there was nothing wrong with his living or having relations with Tamar. But the way it was done indicated that Yehuda, of course, he had relations with a Zoina, a prostitute. Therefore, there was, of course, a tremendous scandal. But Yehuda owned up to it, because Yehuda was an ish emes, even if it cost him his reputation, which it basically did. So therefore, he said, Mimeni, this child is from me. Now, the Medrash says, interestingly enough, that Mimeni was not said by Yehuda, that's Pshat. Mimeni was said by the Rabbi Shalom. In other words, so he said like this, Vayaki Yehuda recognized these three items. Vayomer Tzotka, and he said, she is right. And the Rabbi Shalom said, Mimeni, that this incident which occurred is not from Yehuda. He had no bechira. It's Mimeni. It's because I wanted it to happen. I took away the bechira from Yehuda. And obviously the reason why the Rabbi Shalom took away the bechira from Yehuda was to provide the hester, of course, for the shirish of a Mashiach ben David to descend, since of course there was such a tremendous kitrug against Yehuda. And of course the Rabbi Shalom alluded that when he said Mimeni. So we see that in order for Yehuda to have the shirish and to avoid the kitrugim, the Rabbi Shalom set it up in such a way where he gave hatzlocha to Tamar in two ways. First of all, he sent the malach to take away the bechira of Yehuda, so in that way he gave success to Tamar. And second, he allowed Tamar to conceive from that relationship right away, which is very unusual. Therefore, the Rebbe gave the Siyat Shmaya for Tamar to be Matzliach, because he wanted Peretz, who would be the product of this union, to come out, and of course from Peretz would descend Dover HaMelech, from Dover HaMelech of course would descend the Mashiach ben David himself. Therefore, as a result of that, this was the way the Rebbe provided the Hester in order for the Shirish of the Mashiach ben David to come down, through what's apparently a chet, what's in the guise of a sin or tumah, namely this illicit relationship. Now, as a result, of course, of this union, I mentioned that she gave birth to Peretz and Zerach, and Peretz, of course, was the forebearer of Dover HaMelech, and who was the forebearer, of course, of the Mashiach ben David. Therefore, we see again that the shirish of the Mashiach ben David descends through a parent tumah, or a parent chet, in order to be mastir, to conceal from the eyes of the Sutra Achra what is happening. And that is meant by a pasuk, which is a very great Yesod, fundamental idea. It says in Eov, it says, Miyitin toho mitome, who can extract, who can withdraw purity, mitome, from impurity? And of course what that alludes to is who can take purity, which is the shirish of the Mashiach, from impurity, from impure acts. In other words, from where everybody would see impurity, and on the contrary, that the child who would descend for such an impure act would himself be evil or no great neshama. On the contrary, is that from impurity itself, from the impure acts comes purity, comes the shroshim of the Mashiach, and that the impure acts itself are used as a disguise to conceal from the Sitra Achra what, of course, the Rebbe Shalom is doing. the next incident we find which involves a shirish of the Mashiach ben David is by the famous incident of Ruth and Boaz. Of course, that which we read every Shavuos. Now, to tell you the story briefly, of course, which basically everybody knows, but just as a very quick, brief outline, Elimelech, who was a very great man in Klal Yisrael, and Naomi, his wife, and Machloin and Kilyon, his two sons, they left Israel, they went to Moab, the fields of Moab, because there was a famine in Eretz Yisrael. Now, I'm not going to get into the entire ideas and so on, but basically just to summarize the story. Now, what happened in Moab, of course, is Elimelech dies, and then his two sons married two princesses. They were the daughters of Eglon, king of Moab. Eglon was the king of Moab, and he had two daughters. And Elimelech was so prestigious that he wanted to give away his two daughters to the sons of Elimelech. And who the daughters? Which means, of course, that they were princesses. One was Rus and the other was Orpah. So it came out that Machloin, the first son of Elimelech, he marries Rus, and Kilyon married Orpah. So obviously, Machloin and Kilyon actually married into royalty in terms of Moab. Now, they died, leaving Rus and Orpah widows. Now, it was first Elimelech died, then they married, and then they themselves died, and Rus and Orpah, of course, remained widows. Now, Rus and Naomi then returned to Eretz Yisrael, and Orpah decided that she wouldn't leave Moab, and she decided to stay. And Rus, of course, and Naomi decided to return to Eretz Yisrael, and Rus would not be put off by even by Naomi's statements that she should return. Rus wanted to go back to Eretz Yisrael, or rather go to Eretz Yisrael and be part of the Jewish nation in sincerity. Now, after this, Boaz, who was Naomi's nephew, redeemed Machloin's memory by marrying Rus, because if Machloin died, obviously there was no children from Machloin and Rus, so therefore we have the same idea of a levirate marriage, in other words, Yibum. And therefore, before the Torah, as I had mentioned, any close kin or relative could redeem or preserve the memory of the deceased husband by marrying the wife. Therefore, Boaz, who was a nephew to both Naomi and Elimelech, he was a relative who could be in the position of redeeming Machloin's memory by marrying Rus, and that's exactly what they did. Boaz married Rus, and of course from their marriage proceeded Oved. They had a son called Oved, and then he had a son called Yishai, and of course Yishai, of course, had a son called David. And therefore it comes out that Ruth and Boaz was the great-grandmother and great-grandfather of David HaMelech. Now, if you recall, now we can go more into the pneumis of the idea. If you recall, and of course from David HaMelech ultimately comes Mashiach. So therefore it comes out that Mashiach, of course, comes from Ruth, the union of Ruth and Boaz. Now, if you recall, I said that the neshama of David HaMelech, that nitzitz that was going to be David HaMelech, originally came down into the world from the relationship, the illicit, the incestuous relationship between Lot and his oldest daughter, because the union of that relationship, of course, was Moab. That was the son of that relationship. And at that point, as I had mentioned previously, where the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Matzosi David Avdi in Tehillim, it says, Matzosi David Avdi, I have found David my servant. So the Medrash says, where did I find him? So the Medrash answers, in Sidon, which means that David HaMelech descended at that time in Sidon, or rather, by the incidents occurring in Sidon, namely Lot and the oldest daughter. And that this neshama of David HaMelech wandered, or rather was among Goyim, or appendage to the souls of Goyim, for many, many centuries, and eventually it went into Rus, and of course from Rus it went into Boaz when she married Boaz, and then eventually it came out, of course, into David HaMelech. That is a long trek for the neshama of David HaMelech. Now, we can imagine how much hestia that it has to be. Now, just like we find by the other incidents that there is always the lack of yichus, basically means that the genealogy of the shroshim generally are very poor, and that provides a hesed to the sitrachra. And we also find many times that there is illicit relationships. There's some kind of chatoim, or apparent chatoim going on, some kind of tumah going on, then we would expect to find also by Ruth and Boaz. And the truth is that we do find such a thing. Where do we find it? Where do we find this kind of zimo, or some kind of chashash, or apparent chet going on? And where do we find also the idea that there is no real prestigious or important yichus? What is the actual cover-up in this particular case by Ruth and Boaz? And therefore, as a result of that, this would provide the hester, of course, of the Sitra Achra of being a makatrik against that sherish when it comes down or when it enters Klal Yisrael. Now we find it in this manner. The idea of the tumah or the zimo or the apparent chet, the hester that comes from that guise, was related in this particular incident, that when they came back to Eretz Yisrael, when Ruth and Naomi came back to Eretz Yisrael, so Naomi wanted very much, and Ruth wanted very much, to marry Boaz, because he was the individual who was fit to redeem or to be Yabim Ruth, and therefore preserve or perpetuate the memory of Machlein. In fact, the Machlein is named Machlein, Mochal, because it means that the Rosham forgave him, and therefore he allowed a redeemer to come and redeem his memory. This is what Chazal learned. And Kilyon was Nichlam min ha'olam, was destroyed from the world, because Machlein apparently objected to his father, the acts of his father, perhaps in going away from Eretz Yisrael and so on, and Kilyon of course did not. Therefore Machlein himself is called Machlein to indicate that the Rosh was Mechilem. And the Mechil was the fact that Ruth could marry Boaz, and of course there would be a preservation of his name itself. In any case, to go further, so therefore Naomi wants Ruth, of course, to marry Boaz in order to preserve or perpetuate the name of Machal. Now, Naomi told Ruth to do this following scheme, because she felt that this was the only way she would get Boaz, who then was a Gadol B'Yisrael. Boaz was, the Chazal tell us in the Gemara in Bava Basra that Boaz was Ifsan. Ifsan was one of the Shoftim, one of the judges. So obviously Boaz was one of the greatest men of his generation, besides being the head of the Sanhedrin. And he was one of the Gedolei Hador, which you can imagine how great Boaz was. So therefore Naomi felt that Ruth is not going to be able to marry Boaz in any way. He wouldn't take a woman who basically is a Geuris. Now, so therefore Naomi told Ruth to do this ploy, that she should dress up in all finery, and she should go to Boaz when he is in the threshing floor, because it was at the time of the barley harvest, and she knew Boaz would be up threshing or winnowing the actual barley in the threshing floor, and she told her to dress up, perfume herself and so on, and to go to this place. And she knew also, Naomi knew that Boaz would be sleeping there to guard his barley until daybreak against thieves. And she told her that when everybody leaves, the people who are helping Boaz thresh, that she should sleep, or she should go at his feet and lie down and sleep there. And hopefully in that manner, when Boaz sees that, then he'll be reminded, and this would be an opportunity for Ruth to tell Boaz what she wants, because he's obviously going to say, "Who are you? What do you want?" Although he would recognize it because she gleaned in his field before. But in any case, this would be a way that Ruth could remind Boaz of his obligation to marry her. In other words, to fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum, to perpetuate Machlein's memory. Now, even though this is after the giving of the Torah, so therefore only a brother could do it, a brother of her deceased husband, and Machlein of course had no more brothers, but still, this still is an inyan that anybody else should marry her to perpetuate the name, but you couldn't do it through the Kiddushin ceremony of Yibum. You'd have to do it through regular Kiddushin. You'd have to marry her legitimately according to the Torah's rules, but it would still contain the idea, the mystical idea of the neshama having some kind of a Yeshua, if the kin, the relative, would marry Ruth. So therefore, even though according to the Torah he is not mechuyev to do it because there was no brother, however, the concept of Yibum, in terms of the neshama having some kind of memory, would still be accomplished even in this manner. Now, therefore, Ruth wanted this opportunity, of course, to remind him of his obligation. Now, so therefore, She slept that entire night, and the Rus, the Megillah says that he woke up in the middle of the night because he was going to learn Torah, Rashi says, and he saw her, he was frightened, and then he recognized her, and she said that you should marry her. She said that he should marry her and therefore preserve the memory of Machron. So he said, don't worry, we'll wait till the morning, because there's somebody who's a closer redeemer, and he wanted to see if that person would do it, and if he doesn't, then of course he will do that. But in any case, could you imagine, here's a woman who is not married, and she lies down in the middle of the night next to this old man, which is Yichud. It's clearly Yichud, even though Yichud of a Penuya was not Asa, because it first became Asa by the Bezdin of Dover HaMelech. So therefore there was nothing wrong in the sense that she was secluding herself with a man because she was a Penuya. But even though this is obviously a completely inappropriate manner, so here's a woman, Rus, in total seclusion with Boaz, in an intimate seclusion, and she's very secretive about it because she waited until everybody else went home, and then she dressed herself up, obviously to entice him in a certain manner, and of course it's in the middle of the night. So the entire manner of what was happening indicates it's a completely inappropriate manner, right? And it's obviously, there's a lot of impurity or profanity here, and of course they can easily generate a scandal at what really occurred between them, because who knows, even though Boaz winds up marrying Rus later on legitimately, and they have a child, who knows really when this child really occurred. I'm just saying that this entire incident is certainly inappropriate, and it can easily leave the idea in the people's mind that what went on, of course, wasn't completely above board. So, this is the first thing which happens, and to indicate, or the hester of the idea of a Shurish of Mashiach ben David descending, even though of course nothing happened that night, but there's still a taint of immorality, even though there was no immorality, there was no real illicit relationship, but there's a taint of immorality that possibly Oived, Yisha, and Dover HaMelech had come from this illicit relationship that happened between Boaz and Rus. In other words, just from this kind of a taint or a blot, obviously would also be something which is a negation or negative aspect in terms of the kedusha or the holiness of the lineage of the Mashiach ben David, and of course David HaMelech himself. Now, the second idea, this is the idea of Tumah, which I had mentioned is the first way that this union was to be hidden, and therefore the shirish of David HaMelech and ultimately Mashiach ben David, of course, can be brought into Klal Yisrael, because the shirish was already down in terms of Rus. However, its entrance into Klal Yisrael would now be when she marries Boaz. So therefore at that time there's again a kitrib, because even though the shirish is down, but even if it enters Klal Yisrael, at that point in time there's a tremendous kitrib, because what the Sitra Achra wants is that Klal Yisrael shouldn't have this shirish. So he fights at every step of the way, first not to come down, and second point of course is not to enter Klal Yisrael. The second tremendous hester, which was apparently arranged by the Rabbi Shalom, and which of course occurred, is that there is a certain mitzvah in the Torah, and this is of course the genealogy of David HaMelech, and therefore the Mashiach ben David. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that says L'yovoi Moavi b'kal Hashem, L'yovoi Ammoni v'Moavi b'kal Hashem, that an Ammonite and a Moabite cannot enter into the congregation or the assembly of God. In other words, even if they convert, they cannot marry into the Klal Yisrael. They cannot become part of the body of Klal Yisrael. They can only marry other Moabites or Ammonites who converted also, but they cannot marry Jews. They are apostle for Nisuan, for marriage. Now, there's a halacha Moshe Sinai that says that this only applies to men and not to women. Why? Because the Torah provides a reason, or rather, the Torah alludes to the fact, to this halacha Moshe Sinai, that it only applies to men and not to women. In other words, women may marry, if they convert, may marry Jews, because it says, Al davar asher lo kidmu eschem balechem uvamayim baderach betzeschem mimitzroyim. Why is it that they cannot come in the assembly of God? Because they did not meet you on the way with bread and water when you went out of Egypt. So because they did not do this, therefore they do not deserve to marry into Klal Yisrael, even though of course they can convert into Klal Yisrael, but they cannot marry into Klal Yisrael. Now, from here we see that only men cannot. Who is the one that goes out to meet weary travelers and hungry travelers? The men do, not the women. So when the Rebbeinu had a tfiyah, a claim against the men, obviously it was only against the men because they're the ones who could have possibly done this. There was no claim against the women because women do not go out and greet hungry and weary travelers. They stay home. Therefore, obviously it was the men that sinned and not the women. Therefore, the Torah alludes to the rationale of the halacha in Moshe Sinai by indicating why they cannot enter the assembly of God, of course, is because they didn't go out, and only men do that, not women. Therefore, women are permitted to not only convert, but also to marry in Klal Yisrael. Now, apparently that after Matan Torah, they forgot this halacha, that it included not only men, but it also included, it did not include women. In other words, people thought that no Moav or no Ammon could marry anybody in Klal Yisrael, whether it be a male or female. In other words, anybody from Moav or Ammon can convert, but neither a male or female can actually marry a Jew. In other words, they forgot this halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and basically they forgot it for two reasons. Obviously, it fell into disuse because it wasn't used. Why? Because obviously no Moabitess and no Moabite converted for a long time because there was a state of war between Klal Yisrael and Moav and Ammon for a long time. Therefore, nobody bothered converting. So therefore, if they did convert, then a woman would have said, well, can I marry Israel? And then the entire question, of course, would have been brought up, and they would have recalled the halacha. But this halacha fell into disuse because probably it was not used for many, many years. In addition, besides that, also by all the other Averis, in the sense where the Torah negates or removes different peoples from marrying into Klal Yisrael, there are no sex differences. There are no differences between male or female. For instance, by a Mitzri, when the Rebbeinu says that a Mitzri shall not come into the assembly of God until the third generation, when they are Jews for 3 generations, there's no difference between a male or a female. It's both. When the Torah says that he who is the product of a illegitimate relationship between a woman and another man and not her husband cannot come at all into Klal Yisrael, there's no difference whether that product be a man or a woman, whether it be a mamzer or mamzeres. It doesn't make a difference. So therefore, because by other mitzvahs of the Torah, there's no difference in terms of a foreign nation, even after they convert. If the Torah prohibits them from marrying into Klal Yisrael, there's no difference between a male or female. Therefore, it was logical to assume that also by Moav and Ammon, that the males and the females were prohibited from marrying into Klal Yisrael. And in addition, as I say, it fell into disuse because obviously for hundreds of years there were no real converts among Moav and Ammon because of probably the state of war that existed between them. Therefore, the halacha of Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, Moavi v'lo Moavis was forgotten. That the Isser of Loyove Moavi and Ammoni in Kal Hashem, in the congregation of God, shall not come an individual from Moav or Ammon, that this halacha only applies to Ammoni, a male Ammonite, v'lo Ammonis, and not a female Ammonite. Moavi, that it applies to a male Moabite, v'lo Moavis, and not a Moabitis, it doesn't apply to that, obviously was forgotten. Now, clearly this is exactly what happened between, of course, by Ruth and Boaz. That this halacha was forgotten because of disuse and because the logic of it dictated against. Finally, in the days of Boaz, it was recalled, interestingly enough, even before Ruth and Boaz met each other, which shows you the hashgacha pratis. And therefore, when Ruth married Boaz, of course, he was married in a legal way. However, after Boaz married Ruth, people again thought that it was Asa. And the entire relationship between Boaz and Ruth again fell into disrepute. Therefore, there was a great stain, a tremendous stigma or blot on the entire yichus of David, Ovid, and Yishai, on all of them, for a long time. This is really what happened. And the people who felt that it was Esav for Boaz to have married Ruth were actually vindicated, because Chazal tell us that Boaz lived one night after his marriage and then he died, and which shows a tremendous hashgacha that he conceived Ovid on that one night, that Ruth became pregnant because of only one night, and he died the next day. It was a one-day marriage, and therefore the people who said that what Boaz did was wrong felt they were justified. You see, God punished him and he killed him after one night because it was also for him, of course, to have married Ruth. Therefore, this produced a tremendous stain or blot on the entire yichus of Oved, Yishai, and then David HaMelech. So therefore, again, we find that the entire idea of genealogy was, of course, tainted by Ruth and Boaz. And the same, also another idea is the fact that the entire relationship that they had was initiated, of course, by an apparent midnight affair, which nobody really knows what really happened. Now, it is interesting to note that Ruth and Tamar are very similar in the circumstances which surrounded them. Ruth by Boaz and Tamar by Yehuda. And actually I'm going to enumerate 8 different kinds of similarities that occurred between them both. Both of them lost their husbands. Ruth lost Machloin, and Tamar, of course, Ruth lost Machloin, and Tamar, of course, lost Er and Onan. So they both lost their husbands. Both were daughter-in-laws of great men. Ruth was a daughter-in-law of Elimelech, who was a Gadol B'Yisrael, and Tamar, of course, was a daughter-in-law of Yehuda, of course, who was one of the greatest of Shvatim. In addition, that both of their father-in-laws, of course, came from the tribe of Yehuda. Boaz was from the tribe of Yehuda. He was a direct descendant from Nachshon ben Aminadav, who, of course, is a direct descendant from Peretz and from Yehuda. And of course, Tamar, of course, was also, father-in-law was also from Yehuda, because, of course, her father-in-law was Yehuda himself. Now, both sought Yibum from the family in order to perpetuate the dead husband's memory. In other words, both Tamar wanted to preserve or perpetuate her husband's memory, namely Er and Onan, and therefore wanted to have Yibum performed. She wanted to be involved in Yibum. And also Ruth, she wanted to perpetuate the name of her husband Machlon, and therefore she also sought the institution of Yibum to be done. And as such, there was a tremendous chesed that they did. And many Meforshim bring out the chesed that was done by Ruth and also even by Tamar. And the idea is that, in fact, even Boaz remarks to Ruth that it's remarkable that you want to perpetuate the name of your dead husband's memory so much that you're willing to marry an old man. Ruth was a young woman. She could have easily had married any other people. She also was a very beautiful woman. The fact that she chose Boaz, who's old, obviously, is a remarkable thing, and it shows you the tremendous chesed that she was willing to do, as Boaz himself points out in the Megillah, the tremendous chesed that she wanted to do in order to preserve the memory of her husband. Now, also both were, and as I mentioned, therefore was a tremendous chesed. And as such, both were willing, of course, to marry older men for their husband's sake. Ruth was willing to marry Boaz, and of course, Tamar was willing to marry Yehuda, who was far older than her. Also, both wanted to be part of Klal Yisrael. They wanted to be part of Klal Yisrael in terms of having children who are Jewish. They wanted the children of Judah, Yehuda, to descend from them. Also, both were tzadekes, tzidkonius, they were both righteous. And of course, both had the shroshim of the Mashiach ben David come from them. And we see that in both instances, that the Hester that appeared by both of them, of course, was in a tumah guise. In the apparent relationship that occurred between them was, of course, in the guise of a chet, in the guise of an avera. This then, of course, is the incident of Ruth and Boaz, where we see that Ruth and Boaz, of course, was the ancestor of David HaMelech, and the same idea that when David HaMelech is about to enter Klal Yisrael via Ruth, where his neshama had been wandering for hundreds of years in Moav, that he makes his entrance on a relationship that had a taint from the beginning, and that he makes his entrance into a relationship where everybody's wondering if Boaz is even mutter to marry Rus. Is the product of this union, Oived, is this person possible? Because you're not allowed to marry a Moavis, because they had forgotten the halacha that a Moavis is mutter to marry a Jew. So therefore the genealogy of Yishai and Oived and David was tainted, as well as the original relationship, because who knows really what went on between Rus and Boaz in the night of the threshing floor. Besides the fact, of course, that the original relationship between Yehuda and Tamar was tainted, and we go back to the original relationship even of Moav, where Rus came from, which came from Lot ibn Esav. So you talk about taints in terms of genealogy, you talk about taints in terms of the illicit relationships that could very well have possibly have gone on. Now, to continue. The next incident, and really it's probably the most remarkable incident of all, and we can really understand why. The next incident of the Ashurish of Mashiach ben David, of course, coming down, and therefore, of course, requires great hester, is the birth of David HaMelech himself. And also the growth, or the childhood of David HaMelech himself. Now, what am I referring to? Now, it's important to remember, especially in the events which I'm going to recount, why there was such a tremendous hester, and we'll see that the hester by David HaMelech was greater than all the ones before, was because that, first of all, he was the first king of Israel, the first true king of Israel, and by the word true, I mean that the royal line of sovereignty would come from him permanently, because Shaul, of course, lost it. So therefore, the true royal lineage, the true kingship would emanate from David HaMelech in a permanent basis. So therefore, he was the true first king of Israel. And in addition, he was also the Esav of the Mashiach ben David, which I had mentioned, that Yehuda had lost it, and of course it was given to David HaMelech. Therefore, as a result of this, it would require the greatest hester of all in order to bring David HaMelech into Klal Yisrael, to bring a Esav of the Mashiach ben David, to bring a permanent royal line of sovereignty, the true first king of Israel, would require awesome hester. Now, even though David did not do the tasks of the Mashiach ben David, he was a Mashiach, because the word Mashiach means anointed. David HaMelech was anointed to be king. And the truth is that the Mashiach ben David is nothing more than a king who descends from David, who is also anointed to do his task. So therefore, David HaMelech was a Mashiach. He was anointed, and as such he was a Mashiach. Although, of course, he didn't do the tasks, or rather the task of the Mashiach ben David. Therefore, as a result, since he would be a true anointed king, the first true anointed king of the permanent royal line of sovereignty, and he would be a Esav of the Mashiach ben David, he would have to have the greatest hester of all, and that would mean, of course, several ideas. That his birth and his childhood would have to be steeped in chatoim, or apparent tumah, or chet. In addition, that it would have to seem that there is no real yichus at his birth. There would have to be a taint in his genealogy at his birth, and there would have to be an apparent chet or tumah at his birth. And another idea is that even in his development, as he grew up as a child, there would have to seem that there was no kedusha, that he's on the contrary an ordinary man. That's how far the Rebbeinu Shalom would have to go to hide from the Sitra Achra the idea that David HaMelech would be coming into Klal Yisrael. So we see that the Rebbeinu Shalom clearly wants a complete and an utter concealment in darkness in the union of Mashiach. And in the case of David HaMelech, of course, it was tremendous. Now, where do we see this? After Rus had married Boaz, I had mentioned that he died the next day. So she conceived on that first night, on the only day that she was married to Boaz. So people said that Boaz probably was punished because the marriage itself was asa. That it was asa for him to have a relationship with Rus, and because the halach is probably that anybody from Moav cannot marry, even if they convert, they cannot marry into the body of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, And therefore Boaz was of course punished, and that's why he died the next day. Now, there's a very interesting chazal which is not known to many people. And chazal say that as a result, of course, of the pagam, or the stain, or the blot on Boaz and Ruth, as a result of them, then there was obviously a taint in on the genealogy of Oved, who was their son, and Yishai, who was the grandson. In other words, that they probably were possible to marry in Israel. And even though they felt that the Sanhedrin, the Bezdin of Boaz, permitted this, but you never really know. Apparently, people still doubted the entire halacha. Now, it says also that Yishai, of course, was a tremendously great man. Yishai was among the 4 people who never sinned. There are 4 individuals who never sinned at all, and they only died because the fact that death was ordained from Adam Rishon, not because of their own sins. As I said, that Yishai was among those people who never sinned at all. So obviously he was a tremendous tzaddik. Obviously. Now, what entered at that time was a tremendous fear in Yishai, and he feared that Boaz Ubeis Dinoi perhaps was incorrect about Rus, that maybe they made the mistake. And therefore Rus was really puzzled to marry Boaz, and therefore he himself would come out to be a descendant from an illicit relationship. Or he actually would come out to be a descendant of Moav. Therefore, as a result of that, he was perished from his wife for many years. He separated from her. He refused to live with his wife at all because he was afraid that if his Rus was possible, therefore was possible, of course, to also live with a Jewess. Therefore, he separated from his wife for many years. And what he did was he took a Shifcha Kananis, a Canaanite slave, a maid. When he took her, he made a Tanai. He made a condition. This is what he said to her. He said that if I am a Yisrael, if it is permitted for me to have relations with a Jew, then you are free. In other words, he freed this Shifcha Kananis, and he made this condition that if he is really Jewish in the sense that he's permitted for him, he is Jewish, of course, but because his Rus, everybody knows that she was a Yisrael, there was no question about that. But he said, if it is permitted for me to have relations with you, okay, then you are free, and then she would become a Jew, because if you free a Shifcha Kananis, she of course becomes Jewish. If you are not, or rather if I am not, he said himself that if he is not permitted to have relations with a Yisrael because he is really puzzled, then she has to remain a Shifcha. And apparently it's permitted for a person, a convert, a Moav who is a convert, to have relations with a Shifcha Kananis. Now, so therefore he had relations only with the Shifcha Kananis and not with his own wife, because Yishai was a tremendous tzaddik, and he was afraid that even though interestingly he already had many children from his former wife, but for some reason that ended at that point, he was afraid that he was puzzled. Therefore he abstained from his wife for many years. Now, the Shifcha saw that his wife had tremendous pain, that Yishai separated from her because she wanted to have more children from him. So she said, look, I'll switch places with you, just like Rachel and Leah. That Leah switched places with Rachel, you switch places with me, and he'll never know the difference. Okay? And that's exactly what happened. And as a result of that, his wife miraculously became pregnant on that one time. Okay? Now, 3 months later, all of a sudden, his wife is pregnant. Now he knows he never had relationship with his wife, right? And he didn't know of what occurred. So therefore the obvious conclusion is that what? That his wife had illegitimate relationships with another man, and she's an Eshes Ish. Therefore this child who she's pregnant with must be a mamzer. Therefore it comes out that the child who she was carrying, which of course is Dovid HaMelech, Yishai thought was a mamzer. Now, not only Yishai thought, but all the children thought that way. So Yishai said because the sons of Yishai knew that he had separated from his wife. They knew this, okay? And he said to them, look, he said, and they all knew what was happening. So Yishai said to them, he said to the sons, don't tell anybody what happened. Just forget about it, in that sense. In other words, because we don't want to destroy the mother's reputation, because obviously she's an Eshes Ish that had an illegitimate relationship with another man, And the child that's being born is a mamzer or mamzeres, depending on what comes out. So let's keep it quiet and not destroy the mother's reputation, because in effect you'll be destroying your own by saying this is kind of a mother you have, and obviously who's going to want to marry in that way. So therefore he was, of course, perished from his wife, because now if he thought that, of course, she was an Eshes Ish that had relationships outside himself, and therefore it's even also for him now truly to have relations with his wife. And he, Yishai, and all the children, of course, treated this child, David HaMelech, with contempt and servitude. This is the way they treated him. And in fact, the Yishai himself said that he's a mamzer, therefore treat him as an eved, and he's objectionable to us. But they said nothing to anybody else. Now people observed this treatment that David got, and they did likewise. But they didn't really know what happened. They didn't know that according to Yishai and his sons, David HaMelech was really a mamzer. But they thought the reason why they are treating him with such contempt is obviously because he's obviously a Rasha. He's very evil. So it comes out that everybody treated David HaMelech, Yishai and his sons treated David HaMelech as if he was a mamzer, with contempt and servitude, and everybody else treated him as if he was a Rasha. So it comes out very interesting enough that nobody knew who David HaMelech was. Not Yishai, not his 7 sons, not the community knew, because they all thought he was a Rasha, and even Shmuel Hanavi, who came to anoint David, also did not know who he was. And what was the incident of that? As it says in Nach, that the Rebbe Shem said to Shmuel, go to Beis Lechem, go to the house of Yishai, and there you will appoint a new king among one of Yishai's 7 sons. And the Rebbe Shem did, or rather among one of Yishai's sons, and he didn't say who. So of course Shmuel Hanavi went to Beis Lechem, and he told Yishai, come to me with all your sons, and of course because he wanted to anoint the new king of Israel. So what happened? So Yishai comes with all his sons, and there were 7 of them. And of course he did not come with David, because David is not a son, he's a mamzer. And what David was doing at that time is he was tending the sheep or the flock at the time that Yishai and his 7 sons were going to Shmuel in order for one of them to get anointed. Can you imagine what they thought of David? So Shmuel takes a look at Eliyav, the oldest one, and the oldest son was very tall, he was very beautiful, very handsome, and he was a tremendous tzaddik. So he thought, this must be it. So the Rebbe Shem appeared to Shmuel and said, look not at the outward appearance, because I have rejected him from being, of course, the true king. So he went through each of the children, and finally gets to the last son, and nobody was it. So wait, something doesn't make sense. How could nobody be the king, the Melech Yisrael? Obviously the Rebbe Shem told him that Yishai, among Yishai's children, will be the king, and now in effect there is no child that will be king. Something doesn't make sense here. And I just want to mention that it says in Nach, Shivas Bonov, and his 7 sons. It doesn't say Shiva mi Bonov, 7 of his sons, because Yishai considered he only had 7 sons. He doesn't have an 8th son called David, because David, of course, is a mamzer, and he's contemptuous, and he does servitude kind of work, and nobody had any inkling of the incredible kedusha or tzidkus of David HaMelech. Now, therefore, David, and of course we know that David was in the pasture with the sheep. Now, then Shmuel said, do you have anybody else? So he says, I have another son who is tending the sheep, and he didn't even bother to bring him. So of course he brought him, and when Shmuel looked at David HaMelech was very short, and he was of reddish complexion. So Shmuel Hanavi couldn't see that this is the king of Israel. I mean, forget about the ideas of what Yishai was thinking about, and all the 7 sons sitting there, incredulous at about what was about to happen. So the Rebbe Shem appeared to Shmuel and said, in a sense, what are you waiting for? He is it, anoint him. And which of course, he anointed David HaMelech to be the king of Israel. And it says also, Chazal say that the oil in the horn, where you carry the oil of anointing, started bubbling as David HaMelech got near, which shows that the oil itself was anxious to get on him. It shows you how much it was obvious that David HaMelech was a true king of Israel. So we see here that here's David HaMelech, who his entire yichus was in question. How? Because either way, if Yishai had relations with his wife, and David would have come from that. In other words, if Yishai had known that David was really from him, so the tremendous stigma on the yichus would be that, number one, that he descends from Moav. In other words, his ancestress is a woman who was a Geras from Moav, and that is not a very great yichus. Number one, and number two, that the relationship itself would have been possible. So the yichus would have been tainted, even had Yishai known that he was having relations with his wife. So the yichus would have been possible because the yichus would have been in question because the whole yichus only comes from Moav, and the entire act that the Yishai would be having with his wife itself may be an illicit relationship, because it's very possible that Ruth herself, it was possible for Boaz or also for Boaz to marry her. Therefore, on that side, there would have been a tremendous stain or stigma on the yichus of David HaMelech, and the relationship that Yishai had with his wife itself would have been questioned as an illicit relationship. Now, certainly on the other side, where Yishai didn't even know that he had relations with his wife, so therefore the yichus of David HaMelech was not from Moav. Therefore, it's a possible illicit relationship in terms of Moav. But it was far worse that the genealogy of David was Mamzerus, which of course is far worse than the relationship of Psul that would have come had Ruth been Osa to marry Boaz. So therefore his yichus would have been the fact that he would have been a mamzer, and the tumah would be the fact that his wife had relationship with another man, mamash Eishes Ish, which of course is one of the most chomodig lavim, one of the greatest prohibitions in the Torah. So you can imagine that either way, David HaMelech would have been struck down. Now, not even that, but even after Shmuel HaNavi anointed David HaMelech, you still had that stain on his genealogy, because even though now Yishai knew who David really was, namely it was really his own son, and he now had an eighth son, still it was always in doubt in terms of the genealogy from Moav. Why Ruth was a Geras. Even though Ruth was kosher to marry Boaz, and therefore it wouldn't be an illicit relationship, but still, you never know, or rather the genealogy of David still is from Moav. And it's interesting that from the time that Shmuel anointed David HaMelech until the time that David became king, they still didn't know of the halacha if it was mutter for Ruth to have married Boaz, because Shaul HaMelech asked when David was going out to fight Goliath, he said, "Who is this lad, this individual?" So and Chazal say that the reason why he asked that was because David put on the armor of Shaul, and Shaul was a very tall person and David was very short, and the armor fit perfectly. So Shaul, who knew who David was before, he said, "Who is this person? Is this person worthy to be a king?" So Doeg, who Adomi said was one of the greatest sages of Klal Yisrael at that time, said, "Until you ask if he can be a king, why don't you ask if he can be Jewish, in the sense if he can marry anybody?" So you see that even at that time it was questionable if Ruth was permitted to marry Boaz. And of course, even after everything was solved, in other words, even though Yishai knew that he wasn't the mamzer, and even after David, of course, became king, and therefore Ruth was permitted to marry Boaz, still the lineage of David HaMelech is still from a Moabitess, Moabi. So therefore we see that the entire yichus or genealogy of David HaMelech was held in question, to the extent where he was thought to be a mamzer, far worse than the other people before him. And the second thing is that his birth was done in an apparent guise of chet, tumah, in the fact that they thought he was a mamzer. And not only that, but his entire upbringing was completely hidden. They thought him to be evil. So we see that the Kedusha of David HaMelech was completely hidden. Because not only was he not considered to be mediocre, they could have just said, well, he's okay. He's not a Rasha, right? But he's a mediocre individual. But it's not that they thought he was mediocre. They thought him to be a Rasha. So we see in terms of what extent the Rebbeinu Shalom hid the idea or the Hester of David HaMelech, because he, as I said, was a true first king of Klal Yisrael, and from him will emanate Mashiach. And therefore, his birth was tainted far worse than anybody before, because everybody thought he was a mamzer. His yichus was tainted because mamzeris is one of the worst yichusim you can have. And even his upbringing, everybody thought he was a rasha or he was an evil person. Even Shmuel Hanavi, let alone Yishai and the sons and the community, even Shmuel Hanavi did not recognize who, of course, David HaMelech was. So therefore we see that when it finally came to bringing out the true first king of Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom had to bend over backwards, even to make a far greater Hester than he has ever made before, by actually allowing people to think that this individual was a mamzer.